I'm Emily Thompson, and I've been studying trees longer than most people have been breathing properly. That October morning in Oceanside, crouched beside a dying heritage oak, I knew we were screwed. The bark showed telltale signs of sudden oak death syndrome. Not one tree, not two. The entire grove that had stood here since before California was even a state. Damn it, I whispered, running my fingers along the diseased trunk. The city council meeting was in 6 days. 6 days to convince a bunch of bureaucrats that these trees were worth more than the shopping mall some developer wanted to plant here. I pulled out my phone and speed-dialed my research partner. Jake, we've got a problem. The Oceanside Grove is infected. How bad? Catastrophic. I need soil samples, aerial surveys, and about 3 miracles by Friday. Meanwhile, across town, another kind of storm was brewing. Nora Griffin stepped out of her rental car at the Oceanside Municipal Building, her blonde hair catching the morning light. She'd been sent here as the federal environmental liaison for some treaty negotiations, but honestly, she'd jumped at the chance to escape Washington's political cesspool for a few weeks. The briefing folder tucked under her arm felt heavier than it should. Environmental impact assessments, zoning disputes, the usual bureaucratic dance between development and conservation. She'd seen it 100 times before. This assignment was supposed to be routine. That evening, I found myself at the Oceanside Cinema Club, needing a distraction from the Grove crisis. They were screening The Birds, which seemed appropriate given my current mood. I grabbed a seat in the back, hoping to lose myself in Hitchcock's environmental thriller. Excuse me, is this seat taken? I looked up to see a woman with striking blue eyes and an expensive-looking coat. She had that polished, professional look that screamed government employee, but something in her expression seemed genuinely curious rather than bureaucratic. It's all yours. As the film rolled, I couldn't help but notice how she leaned forward during the environmental scenes, actually paying attention to the subtext most people missed. You know, she whispered during a quiet moment, Hitchcock was way ahead of his time with the ecological themes. Most people think it's just about killer birds, I replied, surprised to find someone who got it. The pesticide theory is fascinating. Nature fighting back against human interference. After the credits rolled, we naturally drifted toward the lobby discussion area. The cinema club always held informal debates after screenings, but tonight it was just the two of us and a handful of film buffs. I'm Nora, she said, extending a hand with a grip that was both professional and warm. Emily. And you're not from around here. That obvious? She laughed, a sound that was prettier than it had any right to be. Washington, actually. I'm here on environmental policy work. My stomach dropped slightly. Government types and tree huggers didn't usually see eye to eye, but something about her seemed different. What kind of environmental policy? Federal oversight on local conservation issues. Making sure everyone plays nice with the regulations. Right. I tried to keep my voice neutral, but she must have picked up on something. You sound like you have experience with that particular dance. I'm a tree specialist. And yeah, I've had my share of battles with federal oversight. She tilted her head, studying me with those blue eyes. What kind of battles? Before I could answer, old Mr. Peterson from the film club interrupted with his theories about Hitchcock's use of color symbolism. But as the discussion wound down and people started heading home, Nora lingered. I hope those battles of yours work out, she said quietly. Me too. Though right now I'm not sure they will. The trees always seem to know something we don't. I looked at her more carefully. That's not something you usually hear from policy people. Maybe I'm not your usual policy person. Walking to our cars in the October evening air, I found myself hoping she was right. The Oceanside City Council chamber smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. I clutched my presentation folder, knowing this was probably my last shot at saving the Grove. 3 days had passed since the cinema. 3 days of frantic research and soil analysis that only confirmed my worst fears. Next item, Heritage Oak Preservation Proposal, presenter Emily Thompson. I walked to the podium on unsteady legs, scanning the room. City councilmen who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. A few environmental activists, some developer types in expensive suits, and there, sitting at a side table marked Federal Liaison, was Nora. Our eyes met across the formal chamber. She was wearing a navy blazer and had that same attentive expression from the movie theater. Professional but genuinely interested. Council members, I began. The Oceanside Heritage Grove is facing an extinction-level event. Sudden oak death syndrome has infected approximately 60% of the trees, with spread rates indicating total loss within 18 months without immediate intervention. I clicked through my slides, showing diseased bark samples, aerial photos, projected timelines. The numbers were brutal, but they were honest. The cost of treatment is significant, but the loss of these trees would be irreversible. Some of these oaks predate European settlement, their living history. Councilman Bradley leaned forward. Ms. Thompson, what exactly are you asking for? Emergency funding for fungicide treatment, soil remediation, and a 5-year monitoring program. Total cost, approximately $2.8 million. The room went quiet. Even I had to admit it sounded like a lot of money for trees. Nora cleared her throat. If I may, council members, federal environmental grants could cover up to 40% of those costs, provided the proposal meets specific criteria. I felt a flutter of hope, but tried to keep my expression neutral. After 20 more minutes of questions and bureaucratic back and forth, the council voted to table the decision pending further review. Not a no, but not the yes I desperately needed. I was packing up my materials when Nora approached. Coffee? She asked simply. I could use something stronger. Coffee first. We can negotiate from there. The Seaside Cafe was nearly empty at 3 in the afternoon. We found a corner booth, and I finally got a good look at her without the formal atmosphere of the council chamber. She'd loosened up somehow, her blazer unbuttoned, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. That was impressive, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. Your presentation, I mean. Passionate but professional. Passionate doesn't usually win funding battles. Maybe not, but it should. She leaned back, studying me. Tell me about the trees. Not the science part, the personal part. I hesitated. Most people glazed over when I talked about my work. You really want to know? I asked. Didn't I? So I told her about finding my first giant sequoia when I was 12, about spending summers in my grandmother's backyard, learning to identify species by their leaves, about the way ancient trees held secrets in their rings that told stories spanning centuries. My grandmother used to say trees were the earth's memory keepers, I finished, feeling slightly embarrassed by the admission. That's beautiful. Her voice was softer now, and makes my job sound incredibly boring by comparison. Diplomatic work isn't boring. Environmental policy coordination? Trust me, it's mostly paperwork and conference calls with people who've never seen an actual forest. Then why do it? She was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee cup in small circles. I thought I could make a difference, change things from the inside. But mostly I just shuffle documents between agencies that don't talk to each other. Sounds frustrating. It is. But today, listening to you talk about those trees, I remembered why I got into this work in the first place. We sat there as the afternoon light slanted through the cafe windows, and I found myself studying the way it caught the gold highlights in her blonde hair. There was something about her that made me want to keep talking, keep sharing things I usually kept to myself. Can I ask you something? I said finally. Shoot. What made you come to the cinema club? I mean, you just got to town. She laughed, and I realized I was already addicted to that sound. Honestly, I was lonely. Hotel rooms get depressing after a while, and I saw the flyer at the coffee shop. I love old movies. Glad you came. Me too. She checked her watch and sighed. I should get back. Conference call with Washington in an hour. Right. Thanks for the coffee. And for what you said about the grants. Emily. She reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. I meant what I said in there, about the federal funding. Let me see what I can do. Her fingers were warm against mine, and for just a moment, the sensation sent something electric through my chest. Professional networking, I told myself. That was all this was. But as I watched her walk away, I had the distinct feeling that wasn't entirely true. 2 days later, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. Nora's voice sounded different, more excited than the polished, diplomatic tone I'd gotten used to. Are you free this morning? I want to see the grove. You want to see dying trees. I want to understand what we're fighting for. An hour later, she pulled up to the grove entrance in her rental sedan, looking ridiculously out of place in her government-issue pantsuit and low heels. I handed her a pair of hiking boots from my truck. City girl shoes won't cut it out here. I'm tougher than I look. We'll see about that. The morning fog clung to the canopy as we walked the main trail into the grove. Even diseased, these trees were magnificent. Massive trunks that would take 6 people holding hands to circle, branches that stretched like cathedral arches overhead. Nora stopped at the first giant oak, tilting her head back to take in its full height. Oh my God! How old is this one? Conservative estimate, 400 years. This tree was growing when the Spanish first sailed up the coast. She placed her palm against the bark, and something in her expression shifted. Wonder, maybe, or reverence. I had no idea, she whispered. The photos don't capture it. Photos never do. I watched her face as we moved deeper into the grove. See that scarring on the trunk? That's from a fire, probably in the 1800s. The tree survived and kept growing around the damage. They're survivors. The ultimate survivors. Until now. I showed her the diseased sections, the telltale bleeding cankers that mark the pathogen's spread. Her questions were sharp, informed. She wasn't just making polite conversation, she was actually trying to understand the science. The treatment protocol you proposed, she said as we paused beside a particularly infected specimen. It's experimental? Partially. We've had success with similar approaches, but never on this scale. And if it doesn't work, then, in 2 years, this will all be dead wood and developers' dreams. She was quiet for a long moment, still touching the bark. That can't happen. Tell that to the city council. I intend to. We spent 3 hours walking the grove trails. Nora asked about everything: soil composition, mycorrhizal networks, the interconnected root systems that made these trees a living community rather than individual specimens. By noon, her pantsuit was dusty, and her hair had escaped its professional styling. But she looked more alive than I'd seen her. Coffee? I suggested as we headed back to the parking area. Actually, would you mind if we went to your place? I've got some federal forms to review, and I'd love to see your research setup. My house was a 40-minute drive through Oceanside's winding back roads. I found myself stealing glances at Nora as she watched the landscape roll past, her window down, that polished Washington facade completely gone. This is beautiful country, she said. I can see why you love it here. It's home. Always has been. My place was nothing fancy, a renovated cabin surrounded by native plants and an overgrown garden. But Nora seemed genuinely charmed by the rustic setup, especially my cluttered home office with its specimen jars, research papers, and botanical drawings covering every available surface. This is impressive, she said, examining my collection of bark samples. You really know your stuff. Had to learn. Nobody else was going to save these trees. We spread federal grant applications across my kitchen table, working through the bureaucratic maze of forms and requirements. Nora explained funding timelines, compliance issues, matching fund requirements. It was dry material, but having her there, leaning close to point out specific clauses, made even paperwork bearable. This section here, she said, her shoulder brushing mine as she reached across the table. If we can demonstrate ecological significance beyond the local level, it opens up additional funding streams. Meaning? Meaning these trees aren't just Oceanside's heritage. They're part of a larger ecosystem that crosses state and federal boundaries. I looked up from the forms to find her face inches from mine. Those blue eyes were studying me with an intensity that had nothing to do with grant applications. Emily, she said softly. Yeah? I should probably mention that I don't usually get this invested in local projects. What makes this one different? I think you know. The moment stretched between us, electric and uncertain. Her hand was still on the table next to mine, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Nora, is this completely insane? She whispered. Because it feels completely insane. Probably. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. When she leaned forward and kissed me, it was tentative at first, questioning, but when I kissed her back, the tentativeness disappeared. Her lips were soft and tasted like the vanilla coffee we'd been drinking. My hand found the back of her neck, fingers tangling in her blonde hair. We broke apart after what felt like both forever, and not nearly long enough. Well, she said, slightly breathless. That complicates things. Good complicated or bad complicated? I'm not sure yet. She smiled, that genuine smile I was beginning to love. But I'm definitely interested in finding out. Outside, the late afternoon sun was filtering through my kitchen windows, casting everything in golden light. Nora's hair caught the glow, and I realized that somewhere between the dying trees and federal paperwork, I'd started falling for this complicated, beautiful woman who'd wandered into my life at exactly the wrong time. Or maybe exactly the right time. The next morning brought Robert Kellerman, Nora's superior, in an expensive suit and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. I was grabbing coffee at the Seaside Cafe when I saw him through the window, gesturing emphatically at Nora in the municipal building parking lot. Her body language told the whole story. Shoulders rigid, hands clasped behind her back in that diplomatic pose I was learning to recognize as her defensive stance. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I didn't need to. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Can we meet? Something's happened." We found each other at the Grove an hour later. Nora looked like she'd been hit by a truck, her usual composed exterior cracked around the edges. "Let me guess," I said. "Your boss isn't thrilled about the grant recommendations. It's worse than that." She sat heavily on a fallen log, staring up at the canopy we'd walked beneath just yesterday. "He's been reviewing my preliminary reports, the ones where I maybe got a little too enthusiastic about the ecological significance of your trees. And he thinks I've lost objectivity," his exact words. She made air quotes, bitterness creeping into her voice. Apparently, federal liaisons aren't supposed to advocate so strongly for local interests. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means he wants me to revise my recommendations. Significantly. The kind of revision that makes your project look less crucial and more expensive than originally assessed. Son of a bitch. Emily, I want you to know that what happened yesterday, what's been happening between us, it didn't influence my professional judgment. These trees deserve protection regardless of how I feel about you. I know that, but he doesn't. She nodded miserably. He's given me 48 hours to submit revised assessments that align with fiscal responsibility and federal priorities, which is bureaucrat speak for making your grove disappear from the priority list. I felt anger building in my chest, the kind of rage that came from watching something precious get crushed by politics and paperwork. So, what happens now? I don't know. She looked at me with those blue eyes that had been haunting my thoughts since yesterday. I'm supposed to choose between my career and doing what's right. And between my career and whatever this is between us. What is this between us? I wish I knew. We sat in silence among the dying trees, both of us understanding that yesterday's kiss had made everything more complicated. It would have been easier if I could dismiss her as just another government bureaucrat, if she could see me as just another local activist with an agenda. But it wasn't that simple anymore. That evening, I found myself at the City Council's preliminary budget meeting, watching Nora present her official findings. She wore her diplomatic mask perfectly, voice steady and professional, as she delivered exactly the kind of lukewarm assessment her boss had demanded. While the Heritage Grove represents significant local environmental value, the proposed treatment costs must be weighed against other municipal priorities and federal funding limitations. The words were careful, neutral, designed to give the council political cover if they chose to reject my proposal. But I caught the way her hands trembled slightly as she shuffled her papers, the brief moment when her eyes found mine across the room. She was dying a little bit with every careful diplomatic sentence. After the meeting, I waited in the parking lot beside her rental car. The October evening was getting cold, and I wrapped my jacket tighter as she approached. "That was quite a performance," I said. "Emily, please don't." "Don't what? Don't point out that you just threw my trees under the bus? Don't mention that yesterday you were talking about ecological significance, and today you're discussing budget priorities? You think this is easy for me?" Her composure finally cracked. "You think I wanted to stand up there and deliver that report? I think you made a choice. Your career over everything else. That's not fair. Isn't it?" I stepped closer, anger and hurt making me reckless. "Yesterday you kissed me in my kitchen and promised to help save those trees. Today you're helping kill them to keep your boss happy. It's not that simple." "It is that simple. You're just too scared to admit it." She stared at me for a long moment, pain written across her features. "You don't understand the position I'm in." "Then, explain it to me. I've worked for 8 years to get where I am. 8 years of being the only woman in rooms full of men who assume I got there because I'm pretty, not because I'm good at my job. If I screw this up, if Kellerman decides I'm not reliable, it's over. There won't be another chance. So the trees die so you can keep playing politics? The trees might die anyway. Even with full federal support, there's no guarantee your treatment will work. At least this way, I don't destroy my career for a maybe. Right, a maybe. I turned toward my truck, too angry and hurt to keep this conversation going. Well, thanks for being honest about your priorities. Emily, wait. But I was already walking away, leaving her standing alone in the parking lot under the fluorescent lights. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way she'd looked delivering that report, the careful neutrality that had replaced yesterday's passion. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was asking too much, expecting her to risk everything for trees she'd known for less than a week. But damn it, those trees were worth risking everything for, and I'd thought, maybe foolishly, that she understood that. My phone buzzed at 2 a.m., a text from Nora, "I'm sorry for all of it." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. Some apologies came too late. The Weather Service called it a historic Pacific storm system, but standing in my truck watching trees bend at impossible angles, I called it a nightmare. 2 days had passed since the parking lot confrontation with Nora, and I'd been avoiding town, avoiding the possibility of running into her. Then the storm hit. I'd driven out to check the grove one last time before the worst weather arrived, wanting to document any additional damage for my final report. The city council was voting next week, and after Nora's revised assessment, I knew what that vote would look like. The first tree came down just as I reached the Forest Service research station at the grove's edge. A massive pine, not one of the heritage oaks, but close enough to make me realize I wasn't driving anywhere soon. The research station was a simple cabin with basic amenities, used by botanists and forestry students doing extended field work. I had keys from my graduate research days, when I'd spent weeks here collecting data for my thesis. I was settling in with my laptop and emergency supplies when I heard another car door slam outside. Through the rain-lashed window, I saw a familiar figure running toward the cabin. Nora burst through the door soaked to the bone, her government-issue rain jacket no match for the Pacific's fury. "Jesus," she gasped, shaking water from her hair. "I didn't expect anyone else to be here. What are you doing out here?" "Same as you, probably. Came to see the grove before," she gestured vaguely, "before whatever happens next." My car's blocked by that fallen pine. We stood there dripping in awkward silence, the weight of our last conversation hanging between us like the storm clouds outside. "Look," I said finally, "we're both adults. We can handle being trapped together for a few hours." "A few hours?" She pointed toward the window, where the wind was bending trees at angles that defied physics. "Emily, this is going to last for days." She was right. The radio confirmed it. A massive low-pressure system had stalled off the coast, bringing sustained winds and flooding that would make travel impossible for at least 72 hours. "Great," I muttered. The first day was careful politeness. We shared the small space like strangers, speaking only when necessary about practical things, how to work the temperamental wood stove, rationing the limited food supplies, taking turns with the single bathroom. But by the second evening, isolation was wearing down our defenses. "I never thanked you," I said as we sat by the fire. The storm's still raging outside. "For what?" "For trying. Even if it didn't work out the way we hoped." Nora stared into the flames. "I keep thinking about what you said, about being too scared to do what's right." I was angry. I said things I shouldn't have. Doesn't make them wrong. She looked at me across the flickering light. "I've been playing it safe for so long, I forgot what it felt like to actually care about something more than career advancement." "The trees?" "The trees, this place, you." The admission hung in the air between us, vulnerable and honest. "Nora, I know it's complicated. I know my job makes everything impossible. But sitting here for 2 days, thinking about how I betrayed something important because I was scared of what my boss might think," she shook her head. "I don't want to be that person anymore." Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside the cabin felt suddenly still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when we get out of here, I'm going to rewrite my assessment. The honest one this time. I'm going to recommend full federal support for your grove, and if Kellerman doesn't like it, he can find himself a new environmental liaison." I searched her face in the firelight, looking for the diplomatic mask, the careful neutrality. But all I saw was the woman who'd placed her palm against ancient bark with wonder, who'd kissed me in my kitchen like she meant it. That could end your career. Maybe. Or maybe standing up for something I believe in will be the first honest thing I've done in Washington. She moved closer on the small couch, close enough that I could see gold flecks in her blue eyes. Emily, I need you to know that what happened between us, it wasn't just the circumstances or the isolation or some mid-career crisis. When I kissed you, it was because I've never met anyone who made me want to be braver. You make me want to be braver too. This time when she kissed me, there was no tentativeness, no diplomatic caution. Her hands found my face, fingers threading through my hair as the storm raged outside our small shelter. I pulled her closer, tasting the wine we'd shared with dinner, feeling the warmth of her skin through the soft sweater she'd borrowed from my emergency supplies. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against mine. "This is crazy," she whispered. "All of it. Good crazy or bad crazy?" "Good. Definitely good." Later, lying together in the narrow bunk while rain drummed against the roof, I traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Her skin was soft and warm, and she made small contented sounds when I kissed the curve of her neck. "What happens when the storm ends?" I asked quietly. "I don't know." She turned in my arms to face me. "But I know I don't want this to end just because the weather clears. Even if it means fighting your boss? Even if it complicates everything? Especially then." She smiled, that genuine smile that had caught my attention at the cinema. "Besides, some things are worth fighting for." Outside, the storm was finally beginning to weaken, but inside our shelter, wrapped in each other's arms, I felt like we were just beginning. I woke in Nora's arms as pale morning light filtered through the cabin windows. For a moment, I forgot about the storm, about dying trees, about everything except the warmth of her body pressed against mine. She stirred slightly, her blonde hair catching the sunlight. "Morning?" she murmured, voice still husky with sleep. "Morning. How do you feel about coffee made on a camp stove?" "Like it's probably going to be terrible, but I'm too happy to care." We dressed slowly, stealing kisses as we pulled on clothes, neither of us ready to break the intimacy that had grown between us during the storm. But reality was calling from outside. I could hear the sound of chainsaws in the distance, work crews clearing the roads. "I should check on the grove," I said, though part of me wanted to stay in this small shelter forever. "Let's go together." The walk to the heritage oaks revealed the storm's damage. Broken branches everywhere, uprooted smaller trees, and worse. 3 of the ancient oaks had suffered major structural damage. One had lost a massive limb that had housed what I suspected was a centuries-old owl nesting site. "Oh no," Nora breathed, standing beside a giant oak whose trunk now showed a fresh crack running 12 feet up its base. "This one might not survive," I admitted, running my hands along the damaged bark. The crack went deep, compromising the tree's structural integrity. Combined with the existing disease, it was probably a death sentence. But Nora was already pulling out her phone, taking photos, making notes. What would it take to stabilize this? Cable systems? Structural supports? "You're looking at another 100,000 in emergency conservation, minimum. And that's just for this one tree." She nodded grimly, still documenting. "Then that's what we'll recommend. Nora, what you said last night about rewriting your assessment. In the daylight, with your career on the line, are you still sure?" She looked up from her phone, those blue eyes clear and determined. "More sure than I've ever been about anything." We spent the morning cataloging storm damage, working together with an efficiency that surprised me. Nora asked the right questions, understood the interconnections between root damage and canopy stress, grasped how the storm had accelerated the grove's decline timeline. "This actually helps our case," she said as we documented the owl nesting damage. "Emergency conservation becomes an ecological imperative, not just a preservation preference. You really understand this stuff." "I understand what matters." She kissed me quickly, unconsciously, like we'd been together for years instead of days. By afternoon, we were back in town, and the world felt different, broader, more complicated. Nora had to report to Kellerman, and I needed to contact the city council about the storm damage. But first, we sat in my truck in the municipal building parking lot, neither wanting to break the spell. "What do we tell people?" I asked. About us, I mean. The truth. That we're figuring it out as we go. And if people think it compromises your objectivity, let them think it. My revised assessment will be so thorough, so well documented, they won't be able to question the science. She was already reaching for the door handle when I caught her hand. Nora last night was perfect. Completely perfect. I kissed her then, there in broad daylight in the government parking lot, not caring who might see. When we broke apart, she was smiling that smile that made my chest tight with possibility. I'll call you tonight, she said, after I've had my career-ending conversation with Kellerman. It won't end your career. Maybe not. But if it does, I've decided there are worse things than unemployment. That evening, she showed up at my door with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine, looking victorious and slightly shell-shocked. Well? I asked, pulling her inside. He threatened to transfer me back to Washington immediately, accused me of losing professional perspective, used some very colorful language about tree huggers and local politics. And I told him he could transfer me wherever he wanted, but my recommendation stands. Federal environmental protection funding for the Oceanside Heritage Grove, including emergency storm damage mitigation. Full support. I kissed her hard, tasting wine and satisfaction. You're incredible. I'm unemployed. Or will be soon. You're principled. There's a difference. We spread the Chinese food on my kitchen table, the same table where we'd worked on grant applications, where she'd first kissed me. Everything felt different now, charged with possibility instead of professional necessity. So what happens next? I asked, twirling lo mein around my fork. Next, your city council votes on a project with full federal backing. Next, I probably get reassigned to some environmental wasteland in Nevada. Next, we figure out if this thing between us can survive in the real world. I vote yes on that last part. Even if I'm based in Nevada? Especially then. Someone needs to save those desert tortoises. She laughed, reaching across the table to take my hand. I love how you assume I'll keep doing environmental work. Won't you? Maybe. Or maybe I'll become a tree specialist. I hear there's good work in that field. Later, when the takeout containers were empty, and we'd moved to the couch with the wine, she curled against my side with a contentment I'd never seen in her before. Emily? Thank you. For what this time? For making me remember who I wanted to be when I first took this job. For showing me that some things really are worth fighting for. I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo mixed with wood smoke from our time at the cabin. Thank you for fighting. Outside, Oceanside was settling into evening quiet, but inside my small house, everything felt like it was just beginning. The Oceanside Tribune ran the story on Tuesday morning with a photo that made my stomach drop. There was Nora, looking professional and composed at the emergency city council meeting, and there was me, gesturing emphatically at the storm-damaged slides. The headline read, Federal Liaison Champions Local Tree Project After Storm. What made it worse was the smaller photo at the bottom, us walking together through the grove, clearly comfortable with each other in a way that suggested more than professional collaboration. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. Emily, have you seen the paper? Jake's voice was tight with concern. This doesn't look good. Define, look good. Like maybe your federal contact has gotten a little too personally invested in your project. The environmental groups are freaking out. They think you've compromised the movement by playing politics. I sat heavily at my kitchen table, staring at the newspaper spread in front of me. Jake, it's not like that. I know it's not. But Sierra Club is calling it inappropriate liaison influence and asking for a federal review of Nora's recommendations. Damn it. Gets worse. Channel 8 wants an interview about the relationship between federal funding decisions and local relationships. Their words, not mine. After Jake hung up, I called Nora. She answered on the first ring, sounding harried. You've seen it, she said without preamble. Hard to miss. How bad is it on your end? Kellerman is in full damage control mode. He's got reporters calling the regional office asking about federal employee ethics protocols. And somehow, someone leaked that we were both at the research station during the storm. Someone saw us? Work crew clearing the access road. Apparently, they mentioned to a reporter that 2 cars had been trapped there for 3 days. Doesn't take a genius to figure out the rest. I rubbed my forehead, feeling the weight of scrutiny settling around us like a net. Nora, maybe we should step back. Let things cool down until after the vote. Absolutely not. Her voice was firm. That's exactly what they want. They want us to act like we have something to hide, like my professional judgment has been compromised by personal feelings. Hasn't it been? No. My personal feelings have been informed by sound professional judgment. There's a difference. That afternoon, I found myself facing a hostile crowd at the emergency public forum the city council had called. Environmental activists who should have been my allies sat with arms crossed, skeptical expressions on their faces. Sarah Chen from the local Sierra Club chapter was particularly vocal. Ms. Thompson, can you assure us that your relationship with the federal liaison hasn't influenced her assessment of this project? My relationship with Ms. Griffin began after her initial positive assessment of the grove's ecological value. Her professional conclusions were reached independently. But you were both isolated together for 3 days during the storm, pressed Tom Martinez from the Environmental Law Clinic. That's when her emergency funding recommendations were developed. Those recommendations were based on documented storm damage that anyone can verify. The optics are problematic, Sarah continued. It looks like environmental protection has been reduced to personal networking. I felt my temper flare. The optics that should matter are 500 dead trees if we don't act fast. But apparently, the personal lives of the people trying to save them are more interesting than the actual conservation work. When I left the meeting, I was shaking with frustration and anger. These were supposed to be my people, the environmental community I'd worked with for years. But they were so focused on political purity they were willing to sacrifice the grove to make a point about ethics. That evening, Nora came to my house looking equally rattled. She'd spent the day fielding calls from Washington, defending her professional conduct to supervisors who'd never set foot in an old-growth forest. They're threatening a formal ethics investigation, she said, sinking onto my couch. Full review of all my communications, my timeline of decisions, my personal activities while on assignment. Will that delay the funding? Indefinitely. And it'll probably end my career either way. Even if they clear me of wrongdoing, I'll be tagged as someone with judgment issues. I sat beside her, taking her hands. They were cold despite the warm evening. I'm sorry, this is my fault. I should have been more careful about how things looked. Emily, look at me. Her blue eyes were fierce. I'm not sorry about any of this. Not about falling for you, not about fighting for those trees, not about standing up to Kellerman. The only thing I'm sorry about is that other people are making it harder than it has to be. Even if it costs you everything? Even then. She kissed me then, soft and determined, and I felt some of the day's tension melt away. Whatever was happening in the outside world, whatever political circus was building around us, this felt real and right. Later, lying in bed with her head on my shoulder, I traced patterns on her bare skin, while she told me about her conversation with a reporter from the environmental magazine. He kept asking if I thought federal employees should be held to different standards when it comes to personal relationships on assignment. What did you tell him? That federal employees are human beings, and human beings form connections with people who share their values and passions. I told him that my commitment to environmental protection made me care about your trees, and my caring about your trees made me interested in getting to know the person fighting so hard to save them. Very diplomatic. I also may have mentioned that if more federal employees actually gave a damn about the work they were doing instead of just collecting paychecks, we might have better environmental policy in this country. I laughed, kissing the top of her head. I bet he loved that quote. He seemed pretty excited about it. Nora? Yeah? Whatever happens with the investigation, with the funding, with everything. I'm glad you're here. Me too, even if we're apparently the scandal of the week. Outside, Oceanside was settling into another quiet evening, but I could feel the attention focused on us, the scrutiny that would follow our every move until this was resolved. Part of me wanted to hide, to protect what we'd found together from the harsh light of public judgment. But Nora was right. We had nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of. If fighting for something we believed in while falling in love was scandalous, then maybe the problem wasn't with us. Maybe the problem was with a world that couldn't understand that the most important work sometimes happens when your heart is fully engaged. The final city council meeting was set for Thursday at 7 p.m. Wednesday morning, I woke to find Nora's side of the bed empty and the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. She was sitting at my table, laptop open, surrounded by printed documents. "How long have you been up?" I asked, kissing her shoulder as I reached around her for a coffee mug. "Since 4. Couldn't sleep." The screen showed her email inbox, filled with messages from Washington. Most had subject lines that made my stomach clench: urgent, ethics review timeline and required, immediate response to allegations. That bad? Kellerman's recommending I be pulled from the assignment effective immediately. Full investigation of my conduct, suspension pending review. I sat down across from her, watching her face as she scrolled through the bureaucratic destruction of her career. And I've been offered a way out. She turned the laptop toward me, showing an email from someone with an important-sounding title. "If I withdraw my funding recommendations and admit to compromised judgment due to personal involvement, they'll transfer me quietly to a desk job in Portland. No formal discipline, no black mark on my record." "What did you tell them?" "I told them to go to hell." More diplomatically, but the message was clear. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. "Nora, maybe you should consider it. This grove isn't worth destroying your life over. Isn't it?" She pulled up another window, showing photos we'd taken of the storm-damaged oaks. "Emily, these trees have stood here for centuries. They survived drought, fire, disease, development pressure. They've been here longer than this country has existed, and I'm supposed to let them die because I fell in love with the woman trying to save them? You said you love me." She blinked, as if just realizing what she'd admitted. "I did. I do. Damn the timing, damn the politics, damn everything else. I love you. I love you too." We sat there holding hands across my kitchen table, surrounded by the paperwork of bureaucratic warfare, and for a moment, everything felt simple and clear. "What are you going to do?" I asked finally. "I'm going to that council meeting tonight. I'm going to present the most comprehensive funding recommendation in federal environmental history. I'm going to save your trees. And then I'm probably going to be unemployed by Friday." That evening, the council chamber was packed. Media crews lined the back wall, environmental groups filled the front rows, and I spotted several people in expensive suits who looked like developers' lawyers. Nora sat at the federal liaison table, wearing her most professional blazer, documents neatly arranged in front of her. She looked calm, composed, every inch the competent government employee. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands were clasped just a little too tightly. The preliminary presentations dragged on. Budget concerns, zoning issues, public comment periods where people argued about everything except the actual trees. By the time they called for the federal assessment, it was nearly 9 p.m. "Miss Griffin," Council Chairman Bradley said formally, "please present your final recommendations regarding federal environmental support for the Heritage Oak Preservation Project." Nora stood, and the room went quiet. Every camera was focused on her. Every reporter had their pen ready. "Council members," she began, "I've spent 3 weeks studying the Oceanside Heritage Grove. I've reviewed soil samples, disease progression data, ecological impact studies, and storm damage assessments. I've consulted with federal botanists, environmental scientists, and policy experts." She clicked to her first slide, showing the grove in all its ancient majesty. "What I found is an ecosystem of irreplaceable value. These trees represent 4 centuries of environmental history. They provide habitat for endangered species, carbon sequestration equivalent to 200,000 cars removed from the roads annually, and soil stabilization that prevents erosion affecting the entire coastal watershed." Click. Disease progression charts. The pathogen threat is real and immediate. Without intervention, total grove loss within 18 months is not just probable, it's certain. Click. Storm damage photos. Recent weather events have accelerated this timeline and created emergency conditions requiring immediate action. She paused, scanning the room. Her eyes found mine briefly, and I saw her take a deep breath. "Therefore, I recommend full federal environmental protection funding in the amount of $3.2 million for immediate treatment, ongoing monitoring, and long-term preservation. Additionally, I recommend emergency designation status that would provide annual federal support for the next decade." The room erupted. Councilman Bradley gavelled for order, but the damage was done. She just recommended twice the funding anyone expected, with long-term commitments that would make the grove untouchable by future development. "Ms. Griffin," Bradley said when the noise died down, Are you certain about these figures? This represents a significant federal investment. I'm absolutely certain. This grove meets every criterion for maximum federal environmental support. The ecological value justifies the cost 100 times over. And your personal relationship with Ms. Thompson hasn't influenced this assessment? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every reporter leaned forward. This was the moment that would define everything. Nora looked directly at the council chairman, her voice clear and unwavering. My relationship with Ms. Thompson began because we share a commitment to environmental protection. That shared commitment led to personal feelings, not the reverse. Every recommendation I've made is supported by scientific data and federal guidelines. The grove deserves this protection regardless of my personal life. But surely you can see how this appears to compromise your objectivity? What compromises objectivity is allowing politics and gossip to override scientific evidence. These trees don't care about my personal relationships. The endangered species that depend on this habitat don't care about council chamber rumors. The only thing that should matter in this room tonight is whether this grove lives or dies. She sat down to scattered applause and the furious scribbling of reporters. When I got home that night, Nora was already there, sitting on my front steps with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. How do you feel? I asked, sitting beside her. Like I just ended my career for some trees and a woman I met 3 weeks ago. Any regrets? She filled both glasses, handed me one, and raised hers in a toast. Not a single one. We clicked glasses as my phone rang with the council's unanimous vote to accept federal funding. The grove was saved, Nora was probably fired, and we were together. For tonight, that felt like victory. 6 months later, I stood in the Heritage Grove watching Nora explain mycorrhizal networks to a group of forestry students. She wore hiking boots now instead of government-issue heels, and her hair had grown longer, catching sunlight as she gestured at the massive root systems. The trees communicate through underground fungal networks, she explained, her voice carrying the same passion she'd once reserved for diplomatic briefings. They share nutrients, warn each other about threats, support struggling saplings. It's like an ancient internet made of roots and chemistry. The students hung on every word. Nora had found her calling as an environmental educator and consultant, using her policy expertise to help conservation groups navigate federal bureaucracy. She made more money than she ever had in government, and she slept better at night. The oak she was standing beside showed new growth where we'd treated the disease. Green shoots emerging from bark that 6 months ago had been dying. The entire grove was responding to treatment, slow but steady progress that made every early morning and late night worth it. Dr. Thompson? One of the students approached me. How did you know the fungicide protocol would work? I didn't, I admitted. Sometimes you have to act on the best information you have, and hope for the best. It was a lesson I'd learned about more than trees. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake, council meeting tonight. Official grove dedication ceremony approval. You coming? I texted back, wouldn't miss it. That evening, the same council chamber where Nora had risked her career was packed again, but this time with celebration instead of controversy. The federal funding had not only saved the grove but brought national attention to Oceanside's conservation efforts. The Heritage Oak Preserve will be officially dedicated this spring, Chairman Bradley announced, with permanent protection status and ongoing federal support for the next decade. Scattered applause filled the chamber. What had once been a contentious political battle had become a point of civic pride. After the meeting, Nora and I walked through downtown Oceanside toward the harbor. The October evening was clear, stars visible despite the streetlights. Remember when you asked me what I was doing at the cinema that first night? Nora said, taking my hand as we walked. You said you were lonely. I was. I'd been lonely for years without realizing it. Going through the motions of a career that felt important, but left me feeling empty. We stopped at the harbor overlook, the Pacific stretching dark and endless beyond the breakwater. What changed? I asked, though I thought I knew the answer. You showed me that caring about something deeply wasn't weakness, that fighting for what you believe in, even when it costs you everything, is the only way to live authentically. She turned to face me, those blue eyes reflecting the harbor lights. Emily, I need to ask you something. Shoot. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulling out a small velvet box that made my heart stop. I know this is terrifying. I know we've only been together for 6 months, and it started with professional disaster. And we're probably both crazy for thinking this can work long term. Nora. But I also know that you make me want to be braver every single day. You make me believe that some risks are worth taking, that some fights are worth having, that some people are worth rearranging your entire life for. She dropped to one knee right there on the harbor overlook, under the stars, with the sound of waves against the rocks below us. Emily Thompson, will you marry me? The ring was perfect, a simple band with a stone that caught the light like captured starfire. But what made my heart race wasn't the jewelry, it was the expression on her face, vulnerable and hopeful and absolutely certain. You realize I come with a grove full of ancient trees that will always need attention? I'm counting on it. And a tendency to fight unwinnable battles for environmental causes? That's what I fell in love with. And a very strong opinion about the importance of root systems and soil chemistry? She laughed, still kneeling, still holding the ring. Emily, will you please just answer the question? Yes, I said, pulling her up to kiss her. Yes, absolutely, completely yes. The ring fit perfectly, which she later admitted she'd achieved by sneaking one of my other rings to the jeweler. She'd thought of everything, planned this proposal like the diplomatic operation it was. There's one more thing, she said as we walked back toward my truck, my hand still tingling from the unfamiliar weight of the ring. More surprises? Jake helped me with something. She pulled out her phone, showing me an email. I've been offered a position as the Grove's permanent federal liaison, new job category, created specifically for long-term conservation projects that need ongoing federal coordination. Meaning I get to stay in Oceanside, permanently. Working with you to protect the Grove and develop similar conservation programs throughout the region. I stopped walking, staring at her. You're serious? Completely serious. Apparently, my testimony at the council meeting impressed some people in Washington. They want to replicate the Oceanside model for heritage tree protection in other communities. So we both get to stay? We both get to keep working with the trees? We both get to keep fighting the good fight, together. That night, we celebrated at my house with takeout Chinese food and wine, the same combination we'd shared the evening she'd first stood up to Kellerman. But everything felt different now, settled, certain. I love you, I said as we sat on my couch, her head on my shoulder, engagement ring catching the lamplight. I love you too. And I love that we're going to spend the next 50 years arguing with bureaucrats and saving trees together. Only 50 years? Fine. Forever. We're going to spend forever saving the world one grove at a time. Through the window, I could see the distant silhouette of the heritage oaks against the star-filled sky. Ancient trees that had survived centuries of change, that had weathered storms and disease and the constant pressure of human development. Just like us, they'd found a way to put down roots deep enough to last.